Right. So, what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about the fact that this was the first film that really launched Joan Harrison's film career as a producer. And I'll also speak about some of the other major collaborators. But most people know Joan Harrison, if they know anything about her at all, as Alfred Hitchcock's protege, right? As her right hand, as his right hand woman. And as someone who really came up through Hollywood as the screenwriter of Rebecca and Suspicion and Foreign Correspondent, and began with Hitchcock in Britain in the mid 1930s. But one of the things that I found in my research for the book Phantom Lady was that much earlier in their careers together, she was really functioning as his creative producer. So as early as The Lady Vanishes and Jamaica Inn, she was effectively a producer. And what that means is that by the time she was working on films like Saboteur in 1941, she was really getting pretty bored. And this is why she decided to go independent. But first, what she did when she left Hitchcock's team was she went independent as a screenwriter and she decided to go solo and try to write her own scripts. So this is in that intermediary time between like 1941 and 1943 before Phantom Lady. And what happened is she had a really rough time of it. So she went for about 18 months writing scripts at MGM and Columbia and Paramount, and everything that she wrote either got shelved or just was produced to very disappointing results. And she was hitting a crisis mode where she was thinking about leaving the industry to the extent that she could. As the United States was entering World War II, she really didn't have anywhere to go. So Phantom Lady was actually something of a last ditch effort on her part. She decided that she would write or adapt Cornell Woolridge's novel Phantom Lady, which just was coming out, had just come out, and this was shrewd on her part because everything that Cornell Woolridge was writing was a hot property, and Phantom Lady was published under his pen name William Irish. Of course, he was publishing under a few different names, but she didn't have any guarantees that this would get made, right? She was essentially adapting this and then taking it with her agent out to studios. And I won't go into the details because you're about to see the film and you may well have seen the film already, but her idea was to put this feminist twist on the film. And of course, Ella Raines's character in Phantom Lady is something of this of like the main character, but in the novel she's basically a marginal character. She's basically like the girlfriend of the main character. She's not even the secretary that we know of. So she takes this script, she and her agent take it to various studios, and everybody says that they're not interested in making the script as she's written it. And finally, they take it to Universal, and Universal also says, look, we don't want to. Well, they actually say they're interested in making the script, but they don't want to make it Joan Harrison's way, right? And so she walks away, and she says, she's essentially a pretty stubborn person. She's ready to leave Hollywood, but Universal makes her this interesting counter offer where they say, if you feel so strongly about it, why don't you produce the film? And so this is how Phantom Lady comes to be, and also this is how Joan Harrison comes to be the first female producer in the studio system, right? Kind of in the 30s to 40s. She takes that moniker and leads the way for a couple of other women to follow right after her as female producers in the studio system. I also just wanted to say a little bit about Ella Raines because Joan Harrison was known for having inspired casting choices, and Ella Raines had not been, she certainly hadn't carried a film before. This was really her breakout performance. And Joan Harrison groomed her for this performance. She does, a great job. And a lot of people looking back have suggested that Joan Harrison kind of projects herself onto the screen and that we can see, particularly because Joan Harrison had been a secretary and was a businesswoman and had a similar style to the character Kansas or Carol Richmond in the film, that we can maybe see Joan Harrison on screen when we're watching Kansas or Ella Raines. But I think that that's really simplifying things to make this kind of one-to-one correlation. And I think we need to give Joan Harrison a lot more credit because what she did is she intuited that there was this emerging female demographic in in World War II, and that there were women who were moving from rural areas to urban spaces, and hence the name Kansas, right? Kansas is actually coming from Kansas to New York City. And these are women with very modern sensibilities, and they're working during wartime. They're kind of wartime workers, and they're also facing different challenges because they're on the domestic war front, and they're facing lots of fears around losing loved ones in the war, and losing family members, losing spouses, and also, say, fiancés, right? So they're marrying men who are going off to war, and they're not even certain of the men that they're marrying, much less what's going to happen when the war hopefully ends. And so these films that Joan Harrison is making as the quote unquote mistress of suspense are channeling a lot of these fears and preoccupations, um, of these women audience members. And she's noticing that women have this strong this strong attraction to mystery and suspense and the occult and gothic, kind of femme noir films. And so she is really, I think, interested in channeling a lot of these impulses, and she does it really well. And the only other thing that I want to say is, or point out, is this really fabulous this partnership that she's forming with the director, Robert Siodmak, because this isn't the first time that this isn't, I'm sorry, the last time that they'll collaborate. They'll make The Strange Affair of Uncle Harry also at Universal. But a lot of film historians suggest that she really helped Siodmak come out of this. He was really stuck in a trap of B films and low budget films, first at Paramount and then at Universal. And that it wasn't until they found each other that Siodmak was able to really begin thriving. And the system, actually, the kind of producer unit system, the particular way that Universal allowed or enabled work to happen, really helped them thrive because they had a lot of creativity. They were able to basically work very informally. And so you can think of Phantom Lady as this interesting laboratory of ideas where Siodmak already was inclined to work in terms of German expressionism and the visual look, that very visceral visual look that you see in Phantom Lady with the, night-filled streets and the rich textures. And a lot of this film feels, it has these long extended sequences without dialogue, right? We talk about it feeling like a silent film sometimes, at certain points. And so I think Joan Harrison had the same artistic sensibilities that Siodmak did, and they filled this world together in terms of the way that it becomes this kind of nightmarish world. And so Ella Raines said that that almost everybody involved in the film, including Franchot Tone, they really felt like this was kind of their big chance to do something important, or that they had a lot at stake. And Franchot Tone would have felt like that because he had just left MGM. He kind of walked out after a 7-year contract and a lot of success, but he was tired of making MGM films, and he wanted to do more independent and experimental work. And he saw this as an avenue for him to experiment. And as you'll see, he really does. So even for a very successful actor like Franchot Tone, this was a film where a lot was on the line. And I think that even though it doesn't necessarily feel polished, Phantom Lady, it doesn't feel like an even, film. It does have a sense of urgency, and it feels like there's a lot of creative pressure. And for that reason, it's terrific. So I hope you enjoy it. And I wish I was there with you. And please have a good night.
Thank you so much.
Hello, hello, hello. How does this work? I'm fascinated.
Oh, you've done these, Diane.
Am I on the screen in New York City?
You are. You're going to be on the screen twice tonight.
I know. This is the best way, right? This is the most extraordinary thing. I've never done this in my life. I better take the glasses off, because what's happening in COVID is that I'm starting to have problems with my eyesight because of the computer daily and all these meetings, and it's fascinating. Anyway, Bruce, thank you for inviting me to be involved. Um,
Well, Diane, I know you're asked to introduce this all the time. In fact, you've done it for us twice before. So I thank you for coming tonight and helping us celebrate the women behind Hitchcock.
well, I wasn't the one of the women behind Hitchcock, believe it or not. I'm,
Mostly we're referring to his wife
I
Alma,
know,
who you
I
knew,
know.
and also the screenplay of Marty was written by a woman, Jay Preston Allen.
Alan, wonderful writer, wonderful person.
Did you have any contact with Jay?
No,
This wasn't
only meeting with her. I never was asked anything. You know, the script was written and ready. I will say quickly that we never got to read. I never got to read the script before accepting the role in Marnie. I remember being told by my agent that I was being asked to portray this character. I never met Mr. Hitchcock nor Alma, but I was invited after I was asked to do the part to his home in Brentwood, and I came on a Sunday, then around noon, and Alma was in the kitchen cooking a quiche Lorraine. I remember at the stove, and I was sitting with Hitch and Alma at their table in the kitchen. It was incredibly informal, I have to say. I'd never had that kind of personal experience with the director I was about to work with in their home in the kitchen eating food cooked by the wife of the director. So it was an unusual beginning with Hitchcock.
And you had been in movies for about 5 years already, starting with
yes. It was 1959 in The Diary of Anne Frank, and then quite a few movies at Fox, and a loan out to Europe, India, and then a loan out to London. Interesting experiences I've had, really all over the world, literally.
Prior to this, you had done. I'm sorry to.
No.
You had done Mirage with Gregory Peck,
and LA and New York City. Yes.
Yeah. So
Wonderful.
was it exciting to be cast in a Hitchcock movie?
Of course, absolutely. It was wonderful and very, I was honored. It was a privilege to be invited, literally invited. I have students now. I've just left one student who has now twins, and they all came today. And I'm like under the table with their little bunnies, and they playing with them. They're 4 years old. So I'm with students all the time here, and some of them aren't getting any work. And one actor has been here 5 years, and he still is just getting little breaks. So I sit there and I'm going, oh dear God, is there something I can do to help this? Because I did not have to go through that.
You were a working actress from the beginning, and you've actually never stopped.
I got that contract with Robert Osborne and I doing a scene from East of Eden, who, by the way, dear Robert, whom I dearly loved, as everyone may know. And
I want to say one thing before we go on, since you mentioned Robert. Every time you come to see a classic film at Film Forum now, you will see the card at the opening of the film, and you're going to see it tonight. It says, presented with support from the Robert Jolan Osborne Endowment Fund for American Classic Cinema of the 30s, 40s, and 50s. And Diane is responsible for us getting that grant.
Oh my gosh, thank you. Oh. Well, that's the least I could do for him. It's most important that his name carries on. And, I'm very emotional right now because I mentioned him, but you bring him up. And there's so much around me with I have a huge poster. He used to stay here at my house. I always said, stay whenever he had the keys. And I'll never forget when he passed away, the executor met with me downtown, and he said, I said, he still has the keys to my house. Don't you think I should try to get you to give them back to me now? And he came and he dumped a massive keys out on a table in a restaurant. and I couldn't find my keys. They weren't there. So all I can tell you is that Robert is around me as a human being, just as a wonderful, wonderful guide. All my life, he was there for some point in my shift to producing. He was there. He wrote articles for the Reporter. He was so kind, and he stayed here, and he used to leave me huge posters written and little pictures that he drew on it and saying, have a wonderful day. I'm going to be back at 6 o'clock in the evening. Have a wonderful weekend. Have a lovely, I mean, no one could have been kinder. And he was always there, but I'm so pleased, Bruce, that you're carrying on this something for Robert every time you screen something. I think it's wonderful, and I thank you and I applaud you.
Well, his name was on our big
Mhm.
Bogart Festival we just finished, or it's still on actually till the
Yeah.
end of the week, and on this series, Women Behind Hitchcock, which we're resuming after a year and 6 months. It was supposed to have gone on in March 2020. So it's resuming with, in fact, Diane, Marnie was one of the last 2 films we played before the lockdown. So let's talk about Marnie, though.
I'm so curious. Yes, I too want to do
Yeah.
that. Marnie was a difficult period in my years working. Every other film had less drama on the set between the artists working and the director. In all of my career, there was no with George Stevens. It was so loving. He used to come up, being my first movie, and give me candy or some little peppermint to get me calm and feel secure, because it was my first film. But Hitchcock, it was the reverse. He used different methods. He used different methods to get you to work, and I think that anger, that wherever I got that stiffness and that tough, he wanted that, and I know that he did things on the set to get that reaction. And so I think he was more like another Kazan, a director who also used personal things to get people to give them the performance that he wanted. And I think he never really directed me so much as he would give me ideas. So I want to start out by saying it was an extraordinary experience working with Alfred Hitchcock. I learned so much watching him talk to other actors. Unfortunately, he was getting on at that time, and he was having a very difficult time with Tippi Hedren. And of course, you already know about that because she's written a book and she's done basically documentaries on the subject, or at least they've been recorded and made. And That Girl was made in England, television. I think he was a genius, and yet there was this other side, this undercurrent of, I keep thinking there was something very childlike about him, maybe even childish, in that I think, and many directors have been known to work this way through their careers, working out their own private lives in the movies they made. In Alfred Hitchcock's case, it was his fantasies, and it was very much the genre of suspense, and in some cases, a kind of horrifying moment. But he managed to do it so subtly and so brilliantly that his style was not to give you everything, not to give it all away, but to hold back. And there was always a sense of mystery, and he kept moving it forward. Subsequently, I've watched a lot of interviews during COVID, and I go on YouTube, and I've seen some fascinating interviews with Alfred Hitchcock, being interviewed on camera by various talk show hosts through the years. And I'm fascinated by some of his simplicity and his one-line comments, even one word in some cases, that just send you right off because you know exactly what he's saying. He said so much with so little, in that he didn't have to overact. And I think it was that I learned so much from, and I learned it from George Stevens. I learned it, less is more. And the fact that that we don't have to give it all away. We can hold back. And holding back is really a form of creative awareness of what's really happening, and that you don't have to overact it because it will reveal itself. And as William Fraker said, we offered him a doctorate at the academy where I've been working. I left there last year, so I'm now in LA most of the time, every time, daily, here at the house. But William Fraker was saying the camera reveals the circumstances, and actors reveal the circumstances. But bit by bit, it's sort of like it's peeling a banana, or just allowing things to happen. And the script is there for as a guide for you. So you really don't have to manipulate much. The director will help you, guide you, at least the good directors do. And Alfred was a good director. He was excellent. He guided me. I mean, the scene when the camera goes right back down through the upper staircase and comes to the front door, and there is the actor, I forget his name now, but he's the guest from the last person that Tippy worked for and she stole from. And he's been invited by me, my character, to the party to cause a problem, to cause chaos. And that camera went right down, and the whole set had to literally, the landing on the upper floor goes up in the air, and the camera goes right through it, zooming down to that front door. And it's fascinating because he wanted me to be aware. But he said, when the door opens and you see who it is that's coming in, and I don't want you to overact. So start the scene telling a joke, ad-libbing with your guests, so that when you see the person arriving at the front door, it's from a joke and you're laughing, and then suddenly the color and the blood drains from your face. And it's like that. Otherwise, he said, what you do is you're talking normally to a person in a party, and then you see something horrible. You have to go like that, and it becomes horrible. It's a horror film, and it's overacting. So he said, start laughing and slowly allow everything to drain from your face so that you're totally still. And I've used that so many times with the young actors in front of the camera. Don't overdo it. Don't overdo it. Let's start this way. Start this way. And you've got a long way to go before you get to this end. The ending should be a surprise. It shouldn't be that we know already at the beginning of the scene what the ending is going to be by being too heavy-handed before you even start the scene. So I learned so much from him.
So he did direct you then. You've said in other interviews that
Tony gave me these wonderful images, Bruce. He gave me images, ideas. He didn't say, now I want you to do this. Let's do it again. He came up to me on one take at the window, and he just touched my face, and he had the curtain. He wanted it exactly the way he saw it in his mind. And he just came up and he just sort of made it fit with the light and the camera and all. He didn't have to do much. He didn't say much about.
Was it a happy shoot?
No, it wasn't. He was stressed. He was stressed out, to tell you the truth. And there was a day which shocked me as an actress, where I was watching a scene being filmed, because I watched a lot. I've always been a listener and a watcher wherever. Thank God I had those Fox years, because I was on sets visiting, and I'll go back to the moment. But I got lucky to be able to watch all these people work. And this particular day, I'm watching, and Hitch fell asleep during the tape. And the assistant director had to go over and touch him and say, print, cut, print. So he literally hadn't, and the actors, I don't remember who they were, but oh my heavens, must have been a moment for them to realize the director hadn't been seeing the scene. So I saw the stress. I was the one invited to the lunch. Tippy was not invited. And I was always surprised why the star was not there at lunch. Sean Connery was there at lunch. I was there. I was just sitting quietly like a mouse, literally a mouse. He went back. He, had red wine for his lunch. And I think that attributed to some extent for his getting tired in the afternoon. But I was sort of being used as a wedge, between Tippy and him. And I think he wanted to make Tippy jealous, maybe, or upset, because he would wait till I was nearer to the window of Tippy's dressing room, and then he would say things to me rather loudly. And I said one day to him, "I wonder what you say behind my back about me."
Mm.
And he said, I would not. Oh no, I care about you. I love you. I would never say anything to hurt you or behind your back. But here's Tippy's room right next to me. And I thought, wow, this is not normal. This is something very strange. And I didn't know enough. I wasn't grown up enough to, all I knew was I felt vibrations that were unhealthy, lacking in, almost on the verge of cruelty. I hate to say it, but I have to say it.
So, is it true? I'm sorry.
No, it's all right.
Is it true that he offered you a personal contract?
He did not offer me a personal contract, but he did ask me if I would work again for him. And I don't recall even anything about it. But I'd never thought anything. That's my agent, so I didn't know. I mean, he wanted to work with me again. I saw that and felt it. But I can tell you that was one of the reasons why I think he was trying to get me to God knows what. But
did you get along with your co-stars, Tippy and Sean Connery?
Yes. I had no problem whatsoever. Sean used to make jokes and play games, very cute games. Years later, we ran into each other a few times, and when I was producing, and he saw me taking all my boxes out of Orion Pictures and going into my little Honda wagon, carrying boxes. He said, "I can't believe I've never known a producer to do carrying their own boxes. You must be a very good producer. You're doing your own." So I laughed and said, "You mean producers aren't supposed to do any work?" I don't know. So.
This was the year Sean became a superstar. It was the same year as Goldfinger. Did that go to his head, or was he?
One day he pulled my arm up behind my back and was twisting it and saying, give, like you do when you're kids. And I said, "Oh, Sean, don't do that. It hurts. It hurts." So he said, his wife then loves that. She loves to have me. I said, "But I'm not your wife."
And do you still see Tippy?
I think I admire Tippy so much, and I admire what she's done. I went to all those events that she had for Roar Foundation when they were doing it. And I really admire what she's done with her life and her the animals, and how much she has to get, how she fights for the rights for those beautiful animals that she has at her place out in the valley. I really admire what she's done and how well she's kept herself going. She's a phenomenal person, and very.
Well, you are too, Diane. You're a phenomenal person.
So I'm lucky that Thank you, Bruce. But I'm lucky I've been around a lot of phenomenal people in my life. I mean, no one even knows how many interesting people that I've fortunate to meet And one day you and I will sit. And my life, I mean, there have been so many with between the Douglases, Melvin and Helen. Then I used to stay with them every time I was in New York for weeks. And Melvin and I were lucky to work on two things in my life, and that was the Inherit the Wind for Hallmark. I played Rachel and was nominated for an Emmy for that performance. And I got to work with him as a producer on a little film that cost us $45,000 that Randall Kleiser directed and I produced. And I called Melvin and said, Melvin, would you do me a huge favor? Would you act in our little half-hour weekend special? Once he said yes, we paid him $1,000. And we flew him to Seaside Park, New Jersey from Vermont. And he lived there in the house. And we worked for a week with these kids. And he played the grandfather. And he loved the kids all sitting around him and asking him questions. Mr. Douglas, what was it like working with? What was it like working? All these were USC graduates and kids from school. And it was basically a student film, but was professional because Randall was directing and he wrote it. It was about his own grandfather. And Melvin was thrilled to do it. He was so kind and loving. And we had in that film, Anne Seymour played his wife, the actress, wonderful actress Anne Seymour, and Barbara Rush played his daughter, his then young wife. She remembered it was he was her father, and then Bruce Davison played the boy. He was about 20 years old then, 19. So I've known Bruce Davison since he was a young teenager almost. And I just saw him last week at Randall's 75th birthday. And he's an artist. My God, he's a beautiful artist. He shared with me all his paintings and I was just stunned. Anyway, that's going way off, but I've had luck in my life. I got to meet Jean Renoir in Beverly Hills.
I want to mention a friend of ours. We're doing a tribute, friend of yours and mine. We're doing a tribute next Sunday to Norman Lloyd here.
Oh, wonderful. Wonderful.
Norman died this past May at the age of 106. And you mentioned Jean Renoir. That was one of his friends.
Yes. They were great artists. I mean, I can only tell you the years that luckily, Norman Lloyd was one of the people I got to know, not very well, but I got to know him just in certain moments in our lives. I mean, I'd run into him and his wife various times, and she was always so pleasant and nice, and he was so nice. And then the last few years, just a few times. And then the neighbors called me and said, Diane, we looked in his book, and there are only two people he really wants to see. And you're at the top of his list.
Wow.
And I went, oh my God. So I tried working it out with his caregiver, and it was really tough to manage because he was just about a week away from death.
Yeah.
And it was so awful that
he was very vital. I saw him right before the pandemic at 105 or 4. He was still with it.
Yeah, but everyone showed up. People came that were Leonard Maltin's wife was so cute. She standing in the outdoors in the group of people. We were all there together. Yeah. And she came up and said, in order to get in the front gate, you have to show your license. It's not just for COVID, but how old you are, because.
Okay. So Diane, we're going to next see you here in person, and we'll talk about everyone you've ever known and worked with. It's going to be great.
No, you're not going to get that.
But we're also waiting for your book. Okay.
Yeah.
When your book comes out, we'll do a book party here. Thanks again. We're now going to show.
Good luck. It's been how long? You got to watch that film now.
Okay.
I'd love to see what your reaction is. Have you all seen it?
You can leave the Zoom on. You can hear.
Oh no, I think that's all right. I've seen it. I just last 2 years ago.
Okay. Thank you for joining
was
us in the
impressed.
miracle of Zoom.
Thank you.
Diane Baker,
Thank you.
live
Thank
from Los
you.
Angeles. Thanks.
Bye. Good luck. Enjoy.
Thanks, Bruce. Thanks for having me. Suspicion begins in darkness. We don't know where we are, but we hear voices and we hear sounds. It's a very disorienting opening. It's the sort of thing that filmmakers usually do in the middle of a film or at the very end of a film, like Fritz Lang did in Ministry of Fear. In the darkness, things are not what they seem to be. In the darkness, everything is up for grabs. It's one of the most unsettling beginnings of any Hitchcock movie. The only one I think that gives it any competition is Vertigo, where we have that chase scene across the roof, which we're plunged into without any preliminaries at all. We don't know what's going on. We don't know who's being chased. We only know that Jimmy Stewart's chasing him. As it turns out, the chase across the rooftop establishes the predicate for Jimmy Stewart's fear of heights, which drives the entire plot of the film. In the case of Suspicion, it's not a meet cute. It's more of a meet danger, for Hitchcock's intention with Suspicion was to cast Cary Grant as a killer. Grant and Hitchcock had a great deal in common. They were both lower middle class English kids, of whom nothing was expected. Both of them became extremely famous and extremely wealthy, which means they were both talented and driven. They both had an ambivalence about women. They could fake an outwardly cheerful personality, concealing a bleakness that could, in Hitchcock's case, rise towards malice, and in Cary Grant's case, could descend into depression. In years to come, when the two men discussed each other, there was almost a familial sense of intimacy. Grant understood Hitchcock on the cellular level, and Hitchcock understood Grant on the cellular level, not as filmmakers per se, but as men, as human beings. Many actors were underwhelmed when working for Hitchcock. The problem for actors in Hitchcock was his insistence on having the movie in his head that he planned to make match up with the movie he was actually making. In other words, it was the storyboards and what they represented. Lorraine Day said, "Your performance was Hitchcock's performance. You read the lines the way Hitchcock read the lines. You added nothing. You took away nothing. You did exactly as he told you, exactly as he had drawn it out on paper. You brought nothing but your body to the set." Cary Grant found that he didn't find that confining. He found it, he liked working that way because Hitchcock had made all the important decisions before Grant got on the set. The weight of choice was lifted off of his shoulders, and all he had to do was inhabit and enliven Hitchcock's decisions. Suspicion is based on a novel by a writer named Frances Iles. It's about a fragile woman married to a quietly murderous man. The novel lets the man get away with murdering the wife, but that was impossible under the production code, which ended up requiring much finagling with the script and a long series of retakes. Opposite Cary Grant, Hitchcock cast Joan Fontaine to play basically the same part she'd played for Hitchcock in Rebecca the year before, that is to say, a nervous wreck. Hitchcock thought he had devised a workaround for the ending of the film that would enable him to make the picture he wanted to make without necessarily reproducing the ending of the novel. In the script, Grant's Johnny, he's feeling smug after bumping off his wealthy but annoying wife, posts a letter she's asked him to mail, which contains the evidence that brings him to justice. It was a sort of ironic snap ending that Hitchcock would often do on his television show years later. But that ending was apparently never shot. RKO, as the picture went into production, was in one of its periodic periods of upheaval. And the man who'd hired Hitchcock to make the picture was Harry Eddington. Harry Eddington was an agent by profession. He had handled Garbo for a number of years. Harry Eddington got canned shortly after the picture started shooting, and in came Joe Breen to run the studio, to make the production decisions. Joe Breen was the arch-Catholic architect of the production code, which bedeviled filmmakers of every stripe for well over 20 years. He had no experience whatsoever in running a movie studio, but that was par for the course at RKO, which had a long series of very strange management decisions, even before Howard Hughes bought the studio. Breen was there for just about a year, just long enough to screw up Hitchcock's ending. Breen decreed that Johnny had to be transformed from killer into an irresponsible rogue. which made Fontaine's character a clinical paranoid instead of a rightfully terrified bride. The Bowdlerized script had been written by Sam Rafelson. Sam Rafelson was a first-rate writer, both in New York and in L.A., who had written, of course, a lot of wonderful pictures for Ernst Lubitsch earlier in the 30s. Rafelson wrote the script in L.A., but Rafelson never lived in L.A. He would get hired to do a movie. He'd come out to L.A. for 2 or 3 months, do the script, and hurry back to New York. When the problems with Joe Breen and the ending came up, Rafelson was back in New York and of no use whatsoever to Hitchcock. So Joan Harrison and Hitchcock's wife, Alma, wrestled with the script, trying to come up with an ending that could pass Breen's strictures. They came up with something that nobody was particularly happy with, not Hitchcock, not Cary Grant, and not the critics, who all smelled compromise in the picture's production. Not that it mattered. Suspicion was RKO's biggest hit of 1941. It made a profit of $400,000. The value of the movie today, I think, is in Hitchcock's sculpting of a crucial piece of Grant's screen character, a deep reserve of calculation and bitterness covered by ambiguity that the actor would expose only when he felt that he was in absolutely safe hands. Notorious, their next collaboration, they made 4 pictures together: Suspicion, Notorious, To Catch a Thief, and of course, North by Northwest. Notorious, their next collaboration, was also made in spite of a lot of interference by the production code, but Hitchcock and Ben Hecht managed to find much more effective workarounds to the problems the Breen office threw in their path. If you don't know that they were having a lot of production rewrites and sending 10 and 20 page sections of the script over to the Breen office to get approved while they were waiting to shoot those 10 or 20 pages, you wouldn't know it particularly. The film feels smooth. Suspicion feels smooth up until about the last 15 minutes, when suddenly it turns into an entirely different picture. Notorious certainly represents a far more successful melding of Hitchcock's intentions with Grant's darker personality aspects. Grant never admitted to the emotional synchronicity between he and Hitchcock. He would say that the reason they got along so well was that opposite Grant, Hitchcock was that they shared a passion for their favorite English sweets, licorice all sorts. Actually, it went quite a bit deeper than that. For his part, Hitchcock had no illusions about Grant. In a seminar Hitchcock had it was either Oxford or Cambridge in the middle 60s. He was talking to some young students, young literature students, writing students. And he was talking to them about movie stars. And he was saying that most movie stars actually do embody some of the characteristics that make them movie stars. He said, you cannot fake likability. He said, for instance, Grace Kelly is authentically a likable human being, and that comes across on screen. He said, conversely, Tippi Hedren is not particularly a likable human being, which also came across on screen. Obviously, this is after Marnie. And then he said, in all of his experience, there's only one movie star so expert that he can fake a likability that he does not, in fact, possess in real life. He said, would any of you happen to think who that might be? And David Hare, who later became a very successful playwright in London and elsewhere, raised his hand and said, Cary Grant. And Hitchcock said, precisely. So Hitchcock was on to Grant. Grant was on to Hitchcock. You might say it was a creative marriage of convenience, but also for Hitchcock, he was willing to put up with Grant's touchiness and persnicketiness and occasional bouts of depression because to him, Grant was the ideal leading man. He was the perfect leading man for a Cary Grant movie. And Grant turned down a slew of Hitchcock pictures, among them Rope, Torn Curtain, several more pictures. He had a very good antenna for pictures that he thought would show him off most effectively. And as a matter of fact, the pictures he turned down for Hitchcock were more or less second and third rate. As a movie, Suspicion, as I said, is more obviously compromised than we're used to with Hitchcock. The ending of Suspicion is nearly as cobbled together as the ending of Topaz, 20 odd years later. Think of it as a preview of coming attractions for the greater accomplishments that were to come with their next 3 collaborations. Thanks very much. I hope you like the picture, and you're lucky to see it in 35 millimeter.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Joe, for that introduction. Hello, everyone. I want to thank also Bruce and Karen and everyone at the Film Forum for putting together this great series. I'm very glad that it's continuing from last year when it was interrupted. And I also, interestingly, this film, Circle of Danger, is one of the only films today you're going to see that isn't directed by Alfred Hitchcock. You have a little mini marathon going on, but this one might be the most obscure film. But the connection to Hitchcock, of course, is Joan Harrison, who produced the film. And Joan Harrison, if you've read Christina Lane's excellent biography, you know that she was Hitchcock's right-hand person for many years and also screenwriter, and then went off to produce her own films, starting with a big hit called Phantom Lady, and which is in the series. And she then went on to, unfortunately, several films she produced that didn't do as well at the box office, partly because she had interference from the studio heads and the censors, and ultimately she made this film, Circle of Danger, as her last film, and purposefully did it outside of the studio system in Great Britain, where she had to bring on another producer. You're going to see in the credits named David E. Rose, who was just starting out. Now, he's really the money person in this. Joan Harrison, was the creative driving force who handled everything, especially selecting cast and crew. So what I wanted to say about her connection, going back again to Hitchcock, is that she co-wrote Rebecca with Philip McDonald, and they were friends. And so she wanted to produce an unpublished novel by Philip McDonald called White Heather. And she liked it very much. It was set in the UK, and it was based on a real life incident. So she had McDonald write a screenplay. They changed the title to Circle of Danger, which sounds like a generic thriller title, but actually has some resonance with this particular story. I won't give it away, so I'll just say the one of the aspects that it connects to is the circularity of the narrative. But in any case, it's a story about an American naval diver who travels from Florida to Great Britain, various parts, to find out what happened to his younger brother when he was killed in a bombing raid, a commando bombing raid during the war. And he's a little perplexed as to why only his brother was killed and no one else on the mission was. So he goes on this journey, and it becomes a sort of a journey of self-discovery as well. And so Joan Harrison picked Jacques Tourneur to direct, who had already established himself in Hollywood with, for example, at the beginning of his career, a very successful low-budget horror movie, The Cat People, and then later film noir films like Out of the Past, which actually is now thought of as one of the quintessential film noirs. And he had a distinct style. However, he did want to change his methods a bit and the subject matter at this stage in the game. So you'll notice a definite difference from those earlier films. Then Joan Harrison picked Ray Milland because he was not only a fine actor that she regarded, but there was a special connection for him. And that is that out of the 140 plus feature films that he made, and then not even counting the dozens of television shows, this was the only one that he made, at least in part of it, shot in Wales, and he was Welsh. He was not born in England, he was born in Wales. And so it had a meaning for him on that level. And it also had another meaning, which was a much sadder, actually tragic meaning, which is that during World War II, his own sister, one of his sisters, was killed in a German bombing raid, which is not a well-known thing people recognize about his life. But it did give him another personal reason for getting involved in the production. One just sort of incidental Hitchcock connection is that this film was made the same year, 1951, as Strangers on a Train was made, and there was a radio version that's in 1951 that Ray Milland is in, that he does that year as well. Of course, a few years later, he works directly with Hitchcock on Dial M for Murder, which I'm sure many of you have seen and is one of his best films and best performances. So the one confusing thing here is, perhaps for some of you probably will be the casting, in that Ray Milland is playing an American. And that becomes a little strange when he's actually in these various, he goes to Scotland and London and Wales and so forth. And he seems to fit in a little all too well, given that he's supposed to be such an outsider. And so in that regard, it's a little odd, the casting, but he does an excellent job. He manages to convey the emotions of a man who's going on this casual fact-finding mission to something that becomes increasingly obsessive, and something that he tries to shield himself the feelings of dread doing as he finds out more and more information. So there are also, even in this very grim storyline, some moments of humor that he provides, that was his stock in trade for many years as a romantic leading man. His leading lady, Patricia Rock, even has a unexpected bit of comic relief. But the only other cast member I want to mention just briefly is Marius Goring, who many of you may remember was the composer hero of The Red Shoes only 3 years before this film. And Marius Goring here is playing a very different role. He may not even be recognizable to some of you, but there is an actual very direct connection to The Red Shoes in the casting, as you will see. And the final person I want to mention as being an important creative contributor to the film is Oswald Morris, the cinematographer. And I had the privilege of interviewing him several years ago, well before I knew I was writing a book about Ray Milland. And he told me that he would, for his color films, he'd mute the colors, which made the Technicolor company very angry. They got a lot of angry letters from them. But he also, in his black and white films, like here, he really does a similar thing where he mutes the black and white and diffuses it to the point of it being almost a bleak gray. And why that's important is that it does coincide with the theme of this moral ambiguity and the uneasiness of the shaky alliances, especially post-war, and how this country is trying to come back from this trauma, that it went through. But what you won't see from, say, a movie like Out of the Past, which is thought of as a film noir, because it has this very expressionistic light and shadow contrast, you won't see that here as much. And I think that makes the film a little hard to categorize, because if you also wanted to think of it, for example, as a crime thriller, it's very low key, and it moves very deliberately towards this climax. And I know people who love it for that reason. I also know some people who don't like it very much for that same reason. So it'll be up to you to decide what you feel afterwards and talk about with people who've seen it and share your thoughts with them. Anyway, here it is. I hope it's a worthwhile experience for you. Here it is, Circle of Danger.
Thank you. Well, thanks. And I know this series is about the women behind Hitchcock. And to find out more about the casting of the women in this film, I refer you to the book over my shoulder there, Vertigo, The Making of a Hitchcock Classic. It's written by Dan Euler, and it's really great. So that's my recommendation to find out more about that side of the film. But I've been invited to talk for the next 5 minutes or so about the composer alongside Hitchcock during the making of Vertigo. And yes, someone, as Joe mentioned, that I wrote a book about, and I hope you will indulge me while I get a PowerPoint queued up here, something that involves clicking a few buttons to get rid of the floating things on the screen. And we are almost there. Does that look about right? I will assume so until I'm told otherwise.
Looks great, Stephen.
Excellent. Well, before I say anything else, let's hear from someone who knew Bernard Herrmann very well.
Obviously, you think very highly of the work of Bernard Herrmann.
I certainly do.
He's been involved as composer and conductor of the music in so many of your recent films. How do you and Mr. Herrmann go about examining the contribution of music to a film?
Well, I don't know, as far as I'm concerned, he does as he likes.
I'm brought in at the very beginning of the idea of the film. And by the time it has gone through all its stages of being written and rewritten and the final process of photographing it, I'm so much part of the whole thing that we've all begun to think one way.
So why was Bernard Herrmann the perfect composer for Vertigo and so skilled at capturing tension in music? Well, partly because he lived his life in a state of tension. He was incredibly sensitive creatively, able to brilliantly translate emotions like anxiety and fear and romantic passion into music. Unfortunately, he was also overly sensitive as a person and very combative with anyone in Hollywood who he thought was more interested in making money than being creative. But that said, Benny, as he was known to his friends, could be loving and generous. He was incredibly knowledgeable, not just about music, but about art and poetry and literature, all of which feeds into the music you're going to hear. A very complex man. As for how Herrmann lasted 35 years in the movies, despite an often volcanic temper, well, for one thing, he had some powerful protectors, starting with this one, Orson Welles. Benny was musical director of Welles's 1938 radio series, the one that gave us the infamous War of the Worlds broadcast. And Orson respected him so much that in 1940 he insisted that Herrmann, who was 29, come with him from New York to Hollywood to score Citizen Kane, Herrmann's first movie score. Well, some 50 films followed, many of them classics, and after starting with Kane, Herrmann ended with Taxi Driver, a score he finished recording the night he died in 1975. Of the many great directors that he worked with, we probably think of this one first, and I love this photo. It's staged, but it captures a real thing, which was how easy it was for Benny to take cat naps because he got up very early to write music. His collaboration with Hitchcock began on The Trouble with Harry, and for a decade, the teaming between the master of suspense and the master of creating tension and character psychology in music was pitch perfect. Hitchcock even put Herrmann on screen in their second movie together, The Man Who Knew Too Much. That's Benny conducting the London Symphony in the sequence set at the Albert Hall. Herrmann loved the way that Hitchcock approached film, and here's one more very short clip of him talking about how they worked together.
Hitchcock is an extraordinarily well-organized man in making of his films. The actual shooting process to him is already boring because he has made the film in his head. For example, he will never give an actor direction how to walk in and out of a room. He will accept the fact that the man had to walk into the room, and if that actor walks that way and it's done with conviction, he's quite happy with it. And so to work with him with music also, it's a great deal that way. He will say, I have left reel 3 for you.
Herman liked to say that the music during a film's opening credits should tell you what the movie is about, and that is certainly true of the movie you're about to see. Right off the bat, Herman tells us that the vertigo in this story is both physical and emotional. And notice that his main title music doesn't give us the kind of long, tuneful melody you can hum as you leave the theater. His music is based on short phrases that repeat and repeat. The effect is hypnotic and makes us feel like we're getting pulled into a whirlpool that is both beautiful and frightening. There is another important theme in Vertigo, the love theme, and you will really hear it during the emotional climax of the film, which, don't worry, I won't talk about. I will just say that it is this scene. It takes place in a hotel room, and as in much of Vertigo, there is virtually no dialogue in it. Instead, as Hitchcock told Herman, we'll just have the camera and you. Years later, when Herman was describing another score of his, Obsession, he said, it contains two distinct elements, romance and tension. They usually go hand in hand. Well, get ready for 2 intense hours of romance and tension, hand in hand, even if those hands sometimes slip. Here are two great pairs, Stewart and Novak and Hitchcock and Herman. Enjoy Vertigo.